Hi, welcome to Decanted with Dave Grega. I'm really excited for this episode. I have with me Dr. James Sledge. Dr. Sledge is an incredible person I met through finding his YouTube channel, Esoterica, on YouTube, and viewing a lot of his content. Absolutely just fell in love with a lot of the things that he was presenting, really appreciated and valued a lot of the content he was putting out, and just felt kind of drawn to a lot of his videos. And so I thought, man, wouldn't it be cool to have a conversation with this person? So just really quickly, I want to give a background onto who Dr. Sledge is and his sort of academic background. He's born in Mississippi, and you are a first-generation college student, which I think is really cool. And so he has a DRS in religious studies with a focus in Western esotericism and related currents from the Universiteit van Amsterdam. Am I saying that correct? Okay.
Close enough. Dutch.
Close enough. And a master's and PhD in philosophy at the University of Memphis. And you are a part-time professor of philosophy and religion in the sort of Detroit metro area. And of course, have your YouTube channel, which is pretty significant now. I think it's over 440,000 subscribers. So you're able to reach quite a bit of people, which is incredible. And you it seems like you have two focuses in your fields of study. You have the religious studies side, like Western esoteric traditions and Hermetic tradition, which is kind of how I found you, and philosophical thought, which is, that's a pretty wide range of things to be heavily into. So it seems like you need a few lifetimes just to accomplish any of your work, really. But the Esoterica YouTube channel, and I just took right off of the channel, which basically explains its mission to explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. And I want to first thank you for coming on the podcast, but also thank you for the content that you put out. I really, that's why I reached out to you, and that's kind of one of the things that I really love being able to do with this podcast, is just be able to get people who I really appreciate on, and just to say, hey, thank you for what you do. I think it's incredible. I really value what your work, and I've gained a lot from it. And I think trying to share this with the world, or share this with people who I may know or my community, is one of the ways that I can sort of be appreciative. So thank you for joining us.
I really appreciate the very kind intro, and it's my pleasure. I love doing education work. I'm a sort of lifelong educator, and it's really a joy to be able to reach a lot of people through YouTube, and also get to hang out with cool people like you. So I appreciate the invitation and glad to be on.
You got it. So before the cameras were rolling, we were just talking, and it's funny because this happens a lot, where before we get started, it's almost like when the cameras are off, people feel like they just jump right into organic conversation. And then I keep thinking to myself, bam, this would be perfect for the podcast. This is exactly what I want in the podcast. It's just unscripted. But because it's unscripted, the first thing that's coming to mind is something that you had mentioned to me that I was sort of shocked by. And that was just how much information, how much texts and works are not available on the internet today, or are not available in a way that's really accessible or modernized or translated. And I'm curious to think, like, I think I understand why that can be something that is an issue. It could be a concern, because it means that we are operating in our present moment and looking toward our future with a very limited window of understanding of our past. And that is not, I think that we're not giving ourselves the best chance that we have to make good, positive, informed decisions now and for our future. So I think for that reason alone, that's kind of alarming to me, that so much information, real history and perspective is lost to us. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I sometimes refer to this as the Google bias, that we assume that whatever is in the first 3 pages of a Google search is all that exists information-wise. And I think many people would be shocked to find out that a significant portion of classical literature has never been translated. A significant portion of, and that's just Latin literature, Latin and Greek. That's not counting Arabic and Farsi and
Right.
other languages.
Right.
So we're talking about a mountain of information from the past that not only has never been translated, but it exists only in manuscripts, or it exists only in pre-modern editions. I've made episodes on Esoterica where the only access I have to a book is me having to acquire a 17th century copy, because that's the only copies that exist. That's it. And sometimes you can find them on archive.org where someone scanned them, but scans can be, all over the place in terms of quality. And also, just like books now go into various editions, authors in the medieval world and authors in the pre-modern world, their books would go into editions, and things would quite change from one edition to the other. I'll give one example. There's a pretty important book by Johann Weyer. Weyer was a skeptic of the witch trials, which was that's a tough spot to be in. That was
boy.
like if you want a quick
Good
way
for
of being
you,
accused of
Johann.
witchcraft. And like I said, if you want a quick way of being accused of witchcraft, be skeptical of the witch hunts. And in fact, King James I called him out by name.
Oh my God!
In his book on demons. Can you imagine being called out by name by a monarch and basically accused of working with the devil? At any rate, Johann Weyer wrote a book called De Prestigiis on the trickery of the devils, and he basically argued that most of the women being prosecuted for witchcraft were just mentally ill. They suffered from what we call melancholia, which is not quite the same as depression. It had a wider meaning back then. It could include a range of things we would now think of as schizophrenia and stuff. But at any rate, he argued that the witches weren't witches at all. They were just poor women or uneducated women suffering from mental illness. And at any rate, he changed his book about 6 times during his lifetime, and every edition is significantly different. And so if you say, for instance, that you found a copy of De Prestigiis, which I made an whole episode on this, there's no modern edition, no modern translation of this, I think, very important book. One of the most important books of ending the witch hunts. And if you want to make a book about that, if you want to translate it, you have to decide which edition are you going to translate. There's 6, 7 editions, and they're all relatively different from each other.
Right.
So this is just one example of a great many about how much is out there, how much is in archives, how much they just discovered a library last year in Romania that had tens of thousands of books. We're not even sure what's in there. So people should not ever think that the extent of what is known can be captured in a Google search.
Right.
It's absolutely just not the case.
Not even close. That's so interesting. And then the other part that I didn't think about was what you just mentioned about how authors would put out multiple versions, or they would put out I guess what's the technical term? It's volumes or editions.
Yeah,
right.
Editions.
And each time they would update it, right, with a new perspective, which is huge. And it's almost like the arc between the editions is the real golden thread that you're looking for. That's
ideally what you would do is present an edition. You'd present the final edition, and then you'd go back and footnotes and stuff and show how it changed over time. That's typically the best way it's done.
Yeah.
But there's all kinds of things that people don't realize happen. For instance, there's a pretty famous esoteric text called the Corpus Hermeticum, which is the most important text for Hermetic philosophy. What people don't know about that text is that over the course of the manuscript life of that text, people would come in and write what is called marginalia. They would write notes in the margins trying to explain what was going on. Well, what ended up happening is the next manuscript writer would take those marginal notes and just build them into the main text as if they were part of the original book. The only edition that's out right now of it, the only scholarly edition, doesn't distinguish between what was originally the original text and what were just random notes added by scholars over the course of hundreds of years. That's a real problem. I mean, can you imagine getting a copy of the Bible where your grandma had written a bunch of notes in the margins and your grandma's notes become part of the Bible?
Oh, wow.
I mean, that you could imagine just how, again, how much of a textual disaster that can be. Not to say those notes aren't important, but we need to know what are notes and what is the original text to make sense of the original text. And so this is the kind of stuff that I think, even scholars, and again, I'm talking about the main scholarly edition, doesn't address that problem. I'm not even sure he knew it was a problem. So the point I want to drive home here is that there's a sense where we think, oh yeah, we've kind of gotten it all figured out. We've gotten all the major things published. Everything's translated. You can go to Amazon and get any book you want in a reliable edition in English. Not even remotely close. not even remotely. And that's not counting books in Hebrew, books in Arabic, books in Farsi that had huge
Wow.
impacts on Western civilization. So so the bottleneck is just very simply how many people out there know Latin or Farsi, how many people can do the critical work of translating that stuff, how many people know both Latin and also know history very well, where they can, as we were talking earlier before we were recording, situate those texts properly in their time period. It's a really Herculean task. It's a really Herculean task, and it's thankless. I mean, how often do you hear things like, "Oh, that's a bad translation"? Even a
No,
bad
yeah,
translation takes thousands of man hours. And
yeah.
so
You almost
any
have to have
translation,
like a sponsor. You almost have to have like a sponsor, like someone who just wants you to pay you enough to be able to be comfortable for your whole life and just go do the good work.
that's what used to be the university, and now the university has altered so significantly. But it's funny now that rather than having one person that pays me to do this, now I have Patreon, where I have a small army of people that subsidize my existence by giving through $2, $5, $10 a month, so I can do the work of basically taking what is extraordinarily inaccessible information and making it more accessible to people. And the size
Right.
of Esoterica, which it's a pretty fast growing channel, and it's a pretty large channel at this point. It just shows you people are really interested in this material and they do want
Mhm.
reliable access to it. And I'm more than happy and in fact blessed to be able to do that as my job.
Yeah, I haven't found anything like your channel in that I came to your channel through, I believe, Hermes Trismegistus,
Mm-hmm.
uh, searching for information. I just I felt particularly called to learning and finding out more about um, anything related to that, and I had a really difficult time finding things that were not either A, overtly biased, obviously
Mm-hmm.
biased, uh, B, just obviously not good information or not quality information,
Mm-hmm.
or C, yeah, basically back to the first two, bias and something that's obviously low quality information.
Or
And
just
it's
crazy
something
people and
something that I
liars,
felt that
which
I couldn't trust.
right.
For me personally, I have always been very, very sensitive to the idea of being ignorant, to the idea of being a fool, thinking that he's smart, um, and I I never wanted to be one of those people. I'm very curious. I want to know. I want to ask a lot of questions. I'm not saying I don't have any beliefs, but I don't have anything that I feel very identified with. In other words, if a belief or an idea is challenged, I'm not threatened personally by it. And it's so hard to find information about these type of things that I actually feel like I can trust listening to and digesting and using that to form my own opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So, and so far, your channel is one of the only channels I've found, and I think that the first one I watched an episode you did on Hermes Trismegistus. Who is this person or people, or it kind of trying to wrap my mind around the idea of what that actually even was, and I was trying to tie in a lot of information that I was hearing here and there. It was jumping timelines, that was jumping cultures, traditions, that was sort of remanifesting and manifesting as something else. And my brain was trying to pull these things together and find little pieces that matched. And I was seeing patterns, but I wasn't having it was hard for me to digest a timeline. It was hard for me to digest a pathway. And your channel really helped me kind of fill in some of those gaps. I still have a lot of questions, but it really helped me narrow these things down and funnel these things in and sort of make some sort of sense to them, which I felt was really cool and interesting.
I
Um,
appreciate that. Yeah, I
yeah,
think part of it's just I'm an academic. I don't have a dog in the fight,
right.
if you'll forgive the metaphor. I'm not here to convince anyone I'm a guru or that I have the secrets of the universe or that I can sell you magic powers or get you a girlfriend or win the lottery for you. I just don't have any. I don't make any pretensions to claims like that. For me, there's history, there are texts, and there's mysteries. just frankly things we don't know. We're not going to know, barring some new archaeological discoveries. And I don't need to claim that I know things that I don't know. And all I can say is this is a text, and this is what we have, and here is how it was transmitted, and this is what we know and what we don't know. And when I speculate, which I'm happy to speculate, I name it as speculation, but I really am an evidence-based, data-driven academic,
Right.
not a guru, I'm not trying to convince you of wild claims about Atlantis or aliens or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. It's always interesting to me, the idea of an academic. I just described how I really appreciate the benefit of having someone like you who is approaching the material that way. It's very beneficial to sort of help create some clarity and stability. And then I think from that, allow people to, make their artistic interpretation of whatever that information means to them.
Sure.
And I think that's great. That's totally fine, as long as that is being seen as art. It's being seen as perspective. Hey, this is my perspective. Hey, I wonder this. I imagine that. Wouldn't it be cool to imagine? Here's what we know. I can't say this is true, but let's just imagine for a moment, and let's play around with that, and let's have fun with it and see what that means. And maybe we discover something, maybe we don't. It's always been difficult.
Lots of people on the channel who are active practitioners. They're people who do magic, and they're active in the world of the occult.
Sure.
And I'll talk to them, and my position is always I don't believe in demons and whatever, but if you do, that's great. And what I can tell you is what the texts say, and what the history says, and what the manuscripts are, and where they came from, and at that point, it's I can give you the diving board. I can tell you a lot about the diving board, but you got to jump. That's your choice to make.
Yeah. Well, God, that's very interesting. So, I that's why what you're doing is pretty rare, because I think it's less attractive to the ego to be in that position, as opposed to being the one doing the cannonball off the diving board, and recording it.
I guess so. I like it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
well, you like it.
I like it. For me, it's like I love. There's nothing better than saying that I don't know something. I think a lot of people take a lot of comfort in knowing stuff. I take a lot more comfort in being really honest about what we don't know. And I think that, sometimes not knowing stuff makes people very uncomfortable. And they, in order to get rid of that discomfort, they lie to themselves, or they pay someone to lie to them. And, we get gurus and cult leaders and other kinds of people that are happy to fill your head with all kinds of made up stuff, as long as you keep, pumping the money in, or whatever. And for me, it's just like, I can say, yeah, I don't know. And not only do I not know, and I'm an expert in this, anyone claiming to tell you that they do know, watch them. Trust them as far as you can throw them.
Right.
Because when they tell you that they know stuff, and I'm telling you that, like, I'm looking at the original manuscript of this and saying, look, there is a hole there. We do not know what's in that hole.
Right.
And anyone who claim they can give you good evidence, great. But if they can't, wait for them to start passing the bucket to put money in. And so I'm just very skeptical of that stuff. I don't like seeing people being manipulated. I don't like people's curiosity being manipulated. I really dislike when people's spirituality is used as a way of manipulating them. And I think the best way to arm ourselves against that kind of manipulation, and to arm others against that kind of manipulation, is having good information and having reputable scholars say, well, we don't know. And when someone claims to do that, your Jim Jones meter should kick on.
Yeah, that's a form of bullying, essentially. And I don't like bullies. Yeah, when you're taking advantage of people like that. And I see it all the time.
I totally agree with you. And again, I don't have a bully pulpit. Most of what I do is say, this is what we have. And people really sometimes don't like it. I get really angry emails from, some of these occult gurus. How dare you publish our secrets? And how dare you tell the world about this, that, and the other? And I'm like, no, man, if it's in a book in a library somewhere, it's not my fault that it's public. Like
Yeah, and
if you're getting power from holding secrets over people, you probably need to get a therapist or something.
yeah,
Like you don't need
that's the whole thing. So, I have to be careful because, it's like the word God, right? It's hard to use that word is because what does it even really mean? And it's been, but like for me, the concept of illumination is very important. And what I mean by illumination is a light as a metaphor for consciousness and awareness
Mhm.
and information. And so to illuminate is to shine light on or to observe, to make an observation, and to expose more information. I think, first of all, is so important. And it's sort of I don't know if it's like a ruler that I use to measure. It's like anybody who is participating in the restriction of illumination, who is trying to censor eyes being opened to information, I just don't trust at all. There's something wrong with that. Even if I don't agree with whatever, or I don't like the way something feels, I want to see more information. I want to see more perspective. I want to hear more thoughts. Um, and so yeah, something like that where you have some guru who's upset about exposing secrets and this, I feel like I understand the excuses. I understand the idea of, well, if we just, it's like giving a gun to a child or something and saying, here you go. And then if something bad happens, it's like, like you have to be the one to monitor and control because you have this great, powerful information that can be used for evil. And you have to be the arbiter of this information and have the secret doorway so that you can vet people and make sure they're not going to be like the little child running around with an actual live, gun or something, and something bad doesn't happen. So it's because I care about you and I care about the world that I have to be this gatekeeper. I understand that argument, but I think that there is a point in maybe human evolution where we have to sort of step into that new level of responsibility of being able to take on more information.
And I'll also say I have read a lot of strange books. I have a lot of strange books within arm's length of me. Very unusual. I mean, and I haven't seen anything in any of these books that is even akin to a rusty screwdriver in terms of danger.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes I have people come over and they're like, "Oh my God, do you feel safe having this book in your house?" I'm like, "It's just paper and print.
Right.
It's not. It's not. It's not like I have TNT or some in my
Mhm.
house. It's ideas are dangerous, and I'll tell you that these books contain ideas that are far less dangerous than what you're going to pick up. Message boards on the internet. I think there are
Yeah.
far more dangerous ideas out there than how to summon a demon. I'm much more worried about kind of conspiracy theories that are floating around these days that convince people of all kinds of things and really do legitimate harm to people's lives.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, I don't think of you know books of alchemy as being particularly dangerous.
Right.
Well, with the exception of you actually try to go like roast cinnabar and produce mercury. I think you should do that in a laboratory setting. You shouldn't try to do that at home. But it's not inherently dangerous. It's chemistry.
Yeah. How much of the alchemy is something that is often linked with like Hermetic tradition. Um, and I see a lot of that. I see a lot of that as metaphor. Uh, Obviously some of it is what we would consider like actually taking a material and turning it into another material through whatever process. Creating gold, for example. But for me, I've always felt like that primarily all of that was metaphor to help us understand how to sort of clean up our own self, our own manifestation of life and consciousness in this world, to sort of level up our game, so to speak, through the transmutation of experience, of contrast, into some sort of meaning and understanding, and ultimately, I guess, wisdom. I mean, that's what philosophy is, right? is
It's one of the
exploring
things
them.
philosophy is. And
Yeah.
this interpretation that it was largely a metaphor is mostly a 19th century interpretation, actually. It was actually developed
Okay.
by a dude named Ethan Allen Hitchcock in the 1850s. So this is a relatively new interpretation of alchemy, but Hitchcock doesn't get the credit for it. It's really Jung that gets all the credit for it. It was also pioneered by a woman named Marion Atwood as well, about 1805. So these are mostly 19th century conceptions of alchemy. But no, we definitely now know that alchemy first entered into Europe in 1144. And so basically from 1144 onwards till the Middle Ages, no, they were out there doing something that we would recognize as something like protochemistry, but they were using a physics theory that didn't work. They were relying on Aristotelian physics, and Aristotelian physics, specifically his physics as detailed about how metals come to be in his book, The Meteorology, which no one reads anymore. No one ever reads Aristotle's Meteorology. In fact, I think most people didn't even know that Aristotle wrote a book on meteorology, but
Wow.
it was one of the most important books in the Middle Ages. Everyone read it. In fact, when it was first translated from Arabic into Hebrew, a local rabbi crossed the Pyrenees just to get a copy. That's how sought after it was. But no, they were doing what we would now recognize as kind of protochemistry. And if you've ever drank a glass of cognac or brandy, you can thank an alchemist, because they pioneered distillation in the European situation. But no, in fact, most of the major chemical processes that we still now use, with some exceptions, were invented by alchemists. Distillation, sublimation. Alchemists discovered sulfuric acid. They discovered nitric acid. They discovered hydrochloric acid. They discovered the properties of these acids. They discovered how to purify things like potassium nitrate in order to produce pure gunpowder.
Wow.
Turns out that gunpowder is a very effective way of turning anything into gold.
Okay.
And so you get enough gunpowder, people will give you gold. And so that became the going way of doing alchemy in the 17th century. But yeah, we now have decoded a lot of their books. And again, when you think of these coded books, you should think of them as trade secrets. There are no patents back then. And so the only way to protect your information is to encode it. But you have to encode it just enough that most people don't understand what you're talking about. But other people who are other experts can say, yeah, that guy does know about blah, 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 blah. And then you can get hired on by a local prince or get a patron of a local prince, and they'll hire you on to do a whole rung of things. Making gold was one of the things the alchemists tried to do, but they did all kinds of other jobs. Making paint was an alchemical thing.
Right.
Making detergents, as you can imagine. One of the signs of wealth in the Middle Ages was having white clothing. We take for granted the fact that white clothing is easy to obtain now, but really, really white clothing was not that easy to obtain. Artificial silk was a thing that they wanted. So yeah, the alchemists were busy, and making gold and silver was one of the things they tried to do. But they were basically industrial chemists,
Right.
at some level.
And so, yeah, they played a really important role. And it's like, I mean, I guess before scientists were natural philosophers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were just sort of experimenting, playing around, making some observations, drawing some conclusions, testing out some hypotheses, failing a lot, doing some things that were not terribly safe, but also
a lot of that.
Yeah.
A lot of
That's
that.
so interesting. And I can see how that would create this need for sort of initiation. Hey, we can teach you how to get into a place where you can then have access to these things that are kind of encoded. And
Right.
I can see how the whole secret society thing could play into that.
Yeah.
And I also
and they never had guilds, right? The alchemists never organized themselves into guilds, unlike the Masons and other guilds where they could protect their secrets through organization. Alchemists worked largely independently, at least in the first few hundred years of alchemy.
Okay.
And there was no university classes in alchemy, unlike astrology and stuff, where you could learn astrology at the university.
Right.
Alchemy was done completely decentralized. The knowledge was passed in a very decentralized way. And so it was really important for you to be able to maintain your secrets, but also publicize the fact that you had figured some stuff out. And you did that through largely encoding your books, which we've mostly successfully decoded a lot of those books and recreated their experiments. And what's neat is that when we've recreated their experiments in labs, we often would hear them say things like, and then there would be a red dragon. And you're like, what in the hell are they talking red dragon? And it turns out when you do the experiment, it produces, a blip of some kind of reaction that red gas flows out of the vessel. And
Right.
they're like, oh, that
Right.
must have been it. And so if you don't know, if you don't actually do what they're doing, and we've recreated Newton's alchemy, other people's alchemy, and we're like, that's why they were doing what they were doing. That's why they thought. I'll give one example. The common idea was that, or one of the alchemical ideas was that metals were composed of mercury and sulfur in some combination. That was the going idea in the Middle Ages, that all metals were some combination of mercury and sulfur. And one of the reasons why they thought that was the way that lead commonly occurs in nature is it occurs as a compound, not as just, you don't ever get silver on its own, but it tends to occur in a compound that's mostly lead. If you take that lead compound, put it into a crucible and heat it, and really, really heat it, you smell sulfur come off because there is sulfur in there. It smells like rotten eggs. And sulfur dioxide comes off. And if you keep roasting it and you get it really, really hot, the lead actually cupellates. It vaporizes. It sticks to the inside of the cupellation furnace, and what's left behind are little beads of silver. To their mind, they had just produced silver. The silver was always there, but if you look right before the cupellated lead all evaporates, it vaporizes. What does it look like?
Yeah,
it looks like mercury. They're like, yeah, everything is just some combination of lead and of mercury and
heat it
sulfur.
or mess with it enough to just
you have to do these certain, in the same way that all these things are happening inside the earth. You have to imitate those in the lab. And if you can imitate those pressures inside the earth, then you can force sulfur and mercury to become silver or gold.
I get how that would make sense, because you find gold in the earth, you find diamonds in the earth, right? And that's so interesting. And I mean, in a way, they're not wrong. I mean, they didn't make silver, but they did, in a sense that the silver was not there in a way that would have been practical and functional to make like a silver ring, for example, or to have pure silver to use for something that required that. And then they did this process, and there it was. And it was usable.
It must have been really, and it is magical. I mean, I don't know if folks ever had the chance to recover silver through cupellation, which is still a way that is, if you take a computer apart and just take a bunch of random metal that has silver in it, cupellation is one way of extracting it. There are more efficient ways of doing it through chemical means and not through heat. But there is something really weird about putting a crucible inside of an oven or a furnace, and it's full of silver or full of what looks like lead, and then you superheat it to about, I think, 1200 degrees Celsius, and then pull it out, and all that's left is silver. It is weird. I mean, you can imagine, and if it's weird to us, and we know what's happening chemically, you can imagine to medieval people, they must have thought, and it only happens at a certain temperature. You have to get it really, really hot to do that.
Right.
But you look in the vessel at one point, you pull it out, there's liquid molten lead. Lead melt. You can melt lead on a campfire. You can and go hunting, and you can melt lead shot on a campfire.
Right.
Imagine watching the lead vanish, and then you pull the thing out, and there's silver there. I tell people, people think, oh, the alchemists were silly. I'm like, no, the alchemists were anything but silly. They didn't understand what was happening, but we would have never gotten to our understanding of what was actually happening had they not built that platform for us.
Yeah, it's like, don't cancel the alchemists,
No, yeah, that's one of my. I know
would have been canceled, right?
Yeah, and people make fun of them, or like think of them as conjurers or whatever, or they're silly, or I'm like, no, like.
Yeah. I could see Newton's Facebook page being censored and violating community guidelines.
Yeah, I mean, to this day, Newton stuff is still kind of censored. If you talk to scientists, the dirty secret about Newton is that the vast majority of his writings were on biblical interpretation about the end of the world and mysticism and alchemy. He was far more interested in that than he was in what we now call science. And it's a dirty secret when they mention, oh yeah, in 1666 he invented calculus, discovered the nature of light, and developed the fundamental laws of Newtonian mechanics. And I'm like, yeah, he also was really interested in alchemy and building Solomon's temple.
Right.
And they're like, yeah, but that other part's silly.
People have such a difficult
they're all
time
related.
Letting those two things be at the same time.
Yeah.
Like he can't be, because we are we like to have Newton as this pillar
Hmm.
of higher thought, of science, of modern, no woo woo, no BS, no conjuring spells, but like science, as we, so because we're so, that's the pinnacle. It's like real science, real modern science. And Newton is supposed to be this founding father, this person who had such a higher awareness of things, apparently this genius. Well, how could he be those things if he thought this or this, or if
Right.
he entertained this idea? Well, it can't be.
Right.
And
Yeah,
it's
it's
like,
cognitive dissonance,
yeah,
which,
yeah,
history doesn't give a damn about our categories. And,
hmm,
there's the old joke, right, that Newton wasn't the first scientist, he was the last sorcerer. And there's some truth to that.
that's cool.
But also Descartes, who we think of as the inventor of rationalism. Descartes only invented rationalism, not that he ever called it that, but he only invented that because he had a dream in which a divine being told him to do it.
Right. I
Like,
know.
we,
God, so
that
great.
that's the stuff that I'm, and I remember in graduate school in philosophy being like, yeah, I want to write about that. They're like, don't write about that. Like, if you write about that, you're done. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, but it really happened. Like, we have to take seriously that rationalism has irrational roots. It was a dream about a divine, like an angel telling him to like write books. If we don't,
Hmm.
if we can't hold these kind of truths in both hands and say that history is messy and that history is more complicated than the stupid categories that we impose upon it, then we're just going to keep imposing stupid categories on history and on ourselves that don't make history any more comprehensible and limit our ability to understand the world right now.
Hmm.
And that's self-defeating to me. And it doesn't mean that I have to believe that a divine being told Descartes to write books. I don't have to believe that. But what I do have to believe is that he believed that. And it
Hmm.
was important enough for him to do it. And to
Hmm.
take that seriously. That's all it means.
To take
I
that
don't have to.
seriously, that's the big part right there
Yeah.
that people miss, because they don't feel like they can. They don't feel, it's like this. There's a phenomenon that I've noticed, especially these past few years, where it's the if this then that phenomenon. And I don't like that. I think that's a big problem when you
Mm,
have this, well, if this, then that. If this, then that. And it's like, no, not necessarily. Sometimes two things that seem completely polar opposite can be true at the same time, and vice versa. And it's actually a reoccurring theme in the world. And this is more of my personal, this is hedging into like my personal beliefs and my opinion. But one thing that turns me on and that I'm sort of fascinated by is patterns and balance. And it's almost like geometry in life, in the macro and the micro, and how
hmm.
things tend to like almost have a sense of humor if you zoom out far enough. Like the irony, right?
Right.
It's sort of fun. It's kind of funny. I mean, it's sort of funny that it's so ironic. It's so
Right.
ironic that it's hilarious.
Right.
Uh,
That's what Hegel famously said, that history repeats itself. That's where we get the idea of history repeating itself, is from Hegel. And Marx famously chimed in and said, "Yeah, it does repeat itself. First as first as tragedy, then as farce.
right.
That yeah, it's that
Right.
that
That's like
any
the fool,
tragedy
fool
zoomed
me
out from
once,
enough
right?
is
Shame
yeah.
on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. It's like
Hmm.
that's interesting you mentioned that, because not many people know that Marx was a Hegelian early on, and then had some developed contrary beliefs and took off from there. But I always thought that
I
was
would
kind of
say that he
interesting.
was a Hegelian all the way through. He just he's Hegel was a dialectical idealist, and Marx was a dialectical materialist.
Mm,
Same method.
yeah.
Underneath the hood, it's the exact same method. It's just a question of which way it goes. And I always tell people, if you read the Philosophy of Right backwards, it's just a Marxist book. If you read it forwards, it's a Hegelian book, but it's the same book.
Oh, that's
um,
interesting.
just read the Philosophy of Right backwards, thesis by thesis, and it
Okay.
reads much like a Marxist kind of book.
You've done a lot of work on Marx, and I think that for me, just personally, in my experience of learning things and feeling into what's happening in the modern day, and trying to make sense of everything and trying to understand, uh, the consequences of this individual Marx having existed seem to just keep flying in my face. It's like I never really knew. Like, when I was younger, maybe 15 to 20 something years ago, if I was looking at, I would hear about Karl Marx, but it sort of seemed like it was kind of, okay, yeah, interesting, cool. But now it seems like it just keeps bubbling back up. Like there's little ribbons of Marx in all of these seemingly unrelated things. And you keep hearing these words, and some of them I imagine are just buzzwords or misinterpretations. But someone like you who studied Karl Marx, I'd be curious to hear a little bit about how you see his works, his ideas, his influence, and how that is relevant today, how that's manifested today. I don't know where I'm going with this, but
yeah, it's funny. I haven't worked on Marx in many years. After graduate school, basically, I was like, yeah, I'm kind of done with Charlie. I'm going to work on something else.
okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think that Marx is one of these people like Freud and several others who, for whatever reason, we just can't quite get over that they're either a nightmare that we can't wake up from for people who are really capitalists,
Mm-hmm.
or they're for socialist folks, they're dreams that we can't realize. So it's one or the other, and it depends on where you land on the spectrum. He's a nightmare or some unrealizable dream.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what I guess I find most compelling about Marx is just his willingness to take one idea and really run with it, and to think critically about capitalism and where we are and what does this mean, and and I think one of the most powerful ideas that I take out of Marx is that Marx had the daring to say history's not done yet, that history is still going, and that history isn't not only still going, but it may even have a direction. There may be rules to it. And I think that for anyone who's scientifically minded, that's an interesting theory,
Mm-hmm.
that history might be going somewhere and it might have rules. And that if we can discover those rules, we might be able to, to self-consciously, for the first time in human history, be driven by something other than the forces of history we can't control. And the idea that we can take the reins of history and drive in a direction that serves all human beings, that's a fantastic vision.
Yeah.
To what degree that's true, I don't know.
Those broad strokes, I think, are pretty, they're important. I think that they are relevant to the human experience, to what it means to be a human now, and also to think about where you would like things to go in the future. Those broad strokes, I think, are very important, very relevant. And it's interesting to think that, at the time where he was coming up with these things, that it wasn't necessarily something that a lot of people were thinking of, maybe that people weren't approaching. Now you could have interpretations, you could criticize his conclusions or what he thought, or you could say, well, that didn't work out so well, or he was naive here or there. But I think that the idea that he was recognized, that he wanted some kind of change, and he recognized that there was some power in the now, and that we weren't just victims to the currents of time, and that we were participants in that, which I think is cool in and of itself. I'm not a Marx fan or anything, but I just, I can recognize that is significant and that is important. So it's interesting.
And I would say that even then, people were far more ambitious about thinking about the future than we are now. I mean, how often do you see people depict hopeful scenes of the future now?
Well, it's
No
not
one does
cool
that.
to do that. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's not cool to do that. It's all dystopian, zombie apocalypse. Everything's going to destroy. It's doomerism. You look at the 1860s when Marx was writing. Marx lived, Marx wrote letters to Abraham Lincoln congratulating him on the ending of slavery. Like, just how, like, wow, we are making progress. Like, folks, like, like he really, there was a moment, and look at the kind of images that people made of the future, people flying cars and, talking on long distances and all kinds of stuff. The Victorians were much more daring and being willing to be optimistic about the future, I think, than we are.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're naive or something, but it wasn't like their world's that great. They lived in the Americans lived in the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that part of that time period that I like, and Marx is one example of that, it's just people being willing to say, let's think daringly about the future, about what human beings are capable of doing in terms of positive stuff. And let's try to realize some of that. Now, again, you can look at the Bolsheviks or whatever and say, yeah, that was a real nightmare. But I think that once we get into a situation where hope is off the table, we might as well just turn the lights off and pack it in. And I'm really, for me, I'm not on that doomerism trail I study the past because I think there is a chance at a good future. And I think the more we doomer ourselves into, we can create a self-fulfilling prophecy that way.
Absolutely.
And I don't know. I think that the audacity of hope and really thinking of the future as a place where human beings can thrive and other non-human animals can thrive, I think that's a really daring opportunity in a world that people were much more willing to do that in the Victorian period than they are now, which is, I think, a pity.
Yeah, hope is one of those things that I think is a word that is used to describe some aspect or some nature of, or some truth of, some deep truth of who and what we are as conscious beings. I think it's a word that's used to describe at least a spectrum of some kind of underlying truth about who and what we are and what makes us special, unique, and powerful, and all of these things. It's something that's tied deeply to who we are, because it's such a powerful concept, and it seems like it's magic in and of itself. It seems like this idea of hope, which you could tie into like the placebo effect and all these other things, right? Like really can make magic, can make the possible out of the impossible, and seems to be a very human thing. And I think the more that we can understand and think about this idea and play with it, I think the more we can understand ourselves. I don't know exactly what that means, but that is one of those things that it's one of those words that kind of makes the hair stand up on my, my neck kind of thing. Like there's something there that's very human and important. I don't know what it is exactly.
I agree. And I also think that sometimes people think of hope as sort of like just sitting by and waiting for something good to happen. I think that's not what ancient people thought hope was. I think was it the founder of Methodism? I think John Wesley once said that that praying for a hole to get dug won't dig it. That prayer is grabbing the shovel. And that's, for me, hope. Hope is not sitting on my hands waiting for someone to rescue me, waiting for the Messiah to come. Hope is getting out there and doing the damn thing. And again, with this esoterica, this YouTube stuff, I'm an educator. That's kind of my gig. That's what I do. That's my calling in life. I could have been born being good at a lot of other things, but it happens so that this is a thing that I'm good at, I hope. And that's why I love being able to do YouTube, is that I can get out, I can turn a camera on, and I can reach tens of thousands of people and provide education for free. And I get emails from people every day, in Brazil, who they make $10 a week, and they're like, I can't afford to go to a university, but I can watch YouTube.
That's so cool, man. Yeah,
it's to me that's like all right,
powerful.
And it also is huge responsibility for me, because you really want to get it right.
Right.
And I spent years locked in the ivory tower, just talking to 5 other people about whatever, and and it was my brother, so all credit goes to him. He was like, my brother, he never went to university. He was like, people want this information, man. You gotta, if you feel like you have an obligation to give it back, this is the place to give it back. And he was certainly right. So it's and I still teach at the university, because I do think I have a service to do to my community. I teach there part-time, and you get paid nothing for teaching for university, so I consider it basically volunteering.
Right.
But I want to live in a community where people are educated, and I'm not going to live in a community where people are educated if I have something to give and I don't give it.
Sure.
And so that's why I really love the job that I have, both educating people at the university level, but also and again, as a first generation college graduate, my dad was a pipe fitter. I remember working with my dad in attics, laying pipe for sprinklers in Mississippi. And I tell you, that's not fun. And my dad always said, if you can get out of the line of work, go do something with your mind. And I was able to do that, thank God. And now my vocation is, if I have this stuff in my brain or on the shelf, my job is to give it back, and to give it back in a way that empowers people to get that education on their own, but also to, if you ever watch an episode of Esoterica, you'll know that at the end of it is always a list of books, because I'm not the end all be all of knowledge. Other folks got to reach out and do the work themselves, because the best teacher you'll ever get will be you.
That's real really powerful advice, and it's a really powerful statement to make. And I think that it sounds, in a way, I mean, you embody a lot of the qualities of a hero, not to be too whatever. But really, I mean, one of the reasons we're attracted to heroes is that a lot of these same things that I'm hearing from you and your story, there's something within you that feels this sense of duty and responsibility, this sense of selflessness, sacrifice, honor, respecting, appreciating life, appreciating mentors, and giving back, a sense of duty. Like, where do these things come from? Are they inherent to just human beings? Are they taught? Are they both? Not everybody feels that way, and certainly not everybody has the courage to actually do the things that you've done to make good on that, which is really important too.
You can't say. I mean, I don't know whether it's learned or innate, or I'm sure it's always some combination of that. It all depends on how the sausage is made. But it's difficult not to read philosophy when you read philosophy all day, every day, and you read Plato and Seneca and the Stoics and everyone else saying, no, do your duty, be kind to people. Don't think of yourself first. Always imagine that you're connected to a web of other people that you're responsible for. When you read Jean-Paul Sartre, and Sartre defines freedom, I think, in the most beautiful way possible. Freedom is choosing what you will be responsible for. To me, that is the most powerful definition of freedom I've ever heard. It's the choice about what you're going to be responsible for. It's not home on the range where you're not responsible for anything.
It's not
freedom
lack
is not
of responsibility. Like,
it's
I'm retired.
Absolutely not.
I'm leaving.
Yeah, I can do whatever. I can just I have the weekend off. I can just lay in bed all day.
Yeah.
No, Sartre says, nope, that's your choice and you're responsible for that. And freedom is self-consciously making the decision about what you're going to be responsible for, and not making a decision is making a decision, right? That's just as much, and I, for me, growing up and reading that stuff, it wasn't just like an intellectual exercise. It wasn't just about like memorizing this stuff for tests or trying to look smart at like parties or something. I don't know. I don't give a damn about any of that. I read it and I was like, no, this is just truth. You need to do your duty as a human being. You need to serve people. You need to be. You need to look in the mirror and see the person that you want to be and be that person. And if education's your bag.
As you're talking, I mean, I'm just, I'm one of these people too. I find personal interest in patterns, in seeing, and as I'm hearing you talk, it's like all these things are blipping through my mind, and these things that I've heard, and ideas and thoughts and experiences, and I feel like what you're talking about, there's a common thread, whether it's in philosophy or teachings or just figures, historic figures, and that's the like what taking inventory of what makes you feel good and what makes you feel fulfilled, and what are the differences between the two.
Right.
Right. And it's like getting out of this place of good, bad, and getting into a place of content and at peace with, and finding your highest calling and your highest joy in like the serving of others. And whether it's, Jesus washing the feet, whether it's Buddha, whether it's the Stoics trying to tell you, hey, you're not going to find fulfillment in all these things.
Right.
And you have guys like, and the Stoics are interesting because you have guys like that are some of the more famous examples of Stoics that are from two completely different backgrounds and circumstances, like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, essentially kind of saying similar things, coming up with similar conclusions. And I think that is really cool too. Also, Seneca, like for me, I don't know, and I don't know if you find this, but for me, Seneca, I always laugh when I read Seneca. Like, he's got some sense of humor that I really
he's
appreciate.
A witty dude. Oh yeah,
like
he has my favorite. He has one of my favorite quotes that I use with my children.
Okay.
When kids, they transitions are hard for kids. They're hard for adults.
Sure.
And I always tell my kids, you can walk with fate or she can drag you.
Like, isn't that interesting?
You can walk with, look, it's dinner time. You can walk with fate or she can drag you. Like, you're coming to dinner. The show is paused. Like,
Right.
and I always think about that, right? When I wake up and there's a day where I'm like, I just don't, not today. I tell myself, you can walk with fate or she can drag you.
That
Like,
is interesting. Right.
amor fati. You have to
Love
come to
of
love
fate.
your fate.
That's
Yeah.
the Stoics. Yeah. Gosh, I almost
And
got that
that's
tattooed
the
on
way I
me
look
one
at some
time.
things. It's like, I wake up one morning and I'm like, do I really want to read this today? Do I really want to do this? And I'm like, this is your bag, man. Like, the clock's coming down, the sand's going through the glass. Love your fate. Do your duty.
That's something amor fati. I actually wrote that on the back of one of my business cards. That was like one half of my business card. It had nothing to do with with winemaking or anything like that, but I wrote it anyways. But I find that at this point in my life, man, I've learned a lot of these things, but now I'm trying to be those things. I'm trying to live those examples, and it's really hard for me. I'm
It's hard
not
for
doing
everybody.
that. I'm not doing that well at it. I could do much better. I need to do much better because I know a lot of these things and they ring true to me. But there's something about, man, it is a heck of a thing to be able to be in a situation where you're feeling like and you're just saying, okay, amor fati, like have that, because
It's
then
hard.
you have to give up being a victim.
Yeah. And then you have to, and the great thing about being a victim is it's always someone else's fault.
Right.
And
Exactly.
I think about, and there's a shift in Stoicism. Early Stoicism was all about how great the sage was, and it was sort of this impossible ideal that if you just become a sage and everything will be easy. And there was a shift in Stoicism later to what they called the progressor. And I love the idea of the progressor. It doesn't mean that you need to be a sage today, and it doesn't mean that you need to figure it all out even in a lifetime. But it does mean that today you're going to have to take a step. And I love the idea of the progressor. You're not trying to figure it all out. You're not looking for some moment of enlightenment. You're not looking for some moment where you have it all figured out, or it's not hard, because it will always be hard. But embracing your identity as the progressor. It's like, how can I progress?
Yeah.
Like maybe I can't do this today. Maybe I can't do that today, but maybe I can do this. And, this is the fallacy of letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. If you have to have everything to be perfect before you start writing, well, you're never going to start writing. If you have to everything be good, if you have to know everything before you start teaching, you're never going to start teaching. If you have to, if the perfect is always, it's the perfect or nothing, it'll always be the nothing.
Yeah.
And you'll always find an excuse for why you can't. And giving up on victimhood is, I think, a great way of putting it, is that when the externals become the reason why you can't, you'll always find a reason why you can't. And, when I started doing YouTube, one of the best pieces of advice I got was that everything that you make at the beginning will be terrible. It'll be hard. You won't like it. You won't like the end product, and you won't be a fan of it. But at the end, you have to get through that process. And I will say, that's why I've never deleted old videos of mine, which I'm not proud of. They're not great. I'm going to redo them, but I'll leave them there. And sometimes I watch them actually just to be like, you've come a long way. Everyone got better. You were the progressor, and you still are, and I will be until I am done. They take me out in a pine box.
Right.
But I think that's a far more healthy, mentally healthy way to keep up at this hard work of whatever it is, winemaking, teaching, whatever it is that you've chosen to be responsible for in this life.
Reminds me of the Man in the Arena speech by Roosevelt to those newly sworn in American citizens in France. And he talks about the arena. It's not the critic who counts. It's the man in the arena. It doesn't matter if you win or lose. It's the doing of the thing. It's the, and so finding meaning in the action itself of trying.
And not being worried when people criticize you or whatever. I love that line of Epictetus. He's like, when people criticize me, I always ask them, but you should know about the other terrible things I do. Is that the worst you got?
Right.
I love that. Right. He's like, oh, Epictetus is a cripple. He's like, oh, is that the worst thing you know about me? Let me tell you how lazy I am too. Or whatever. Right. It's, I love the idea of anything you can criticize, I can do better. Like, I know the worst parts of me better than you do.
By when he was a slave, essentially.
Yeah.
He was beaten.
The great story about his being disabled, right, is that it was one of Nero's cronies said he was twisting his leg, because he's a Stoic. He's like, "How see how Stoic you are?" And Epictetus says, "If you continue to twist my leg like that, you will break it." And he twisted it more, and it broke, shattered. And famously, Epictetus winced, and they were all looking for him to cry out in pain. And he winced. He was obviously in agony. And he famously said, "I told you that if you twisted it that further, it would break."
Wow.
What a victory!
Wow.
Like, I told you it would break. Like, somehow I'm right. Like, even in pain, even having been tortured by these sadistic, jerks, bullied.
God, that's so interesting. Is that turn the other cheek? Is that really what the meaning of that is? I don't know.
The old story about that, right? The turning the cheek thing, right? Is that Jesus was a clever dude, right? When someone hits you with the back of their hand, your face, if they hit you with the right hand, your face is going to go one direction. If they hit you again, they have to hit you with the open hand. So Jesus is being clever. It's not just about like turn the other cheek. It's like, give them the other cheek. Make them hit you like a man.
Right.
And so there's a pacifistic way of reading that, but there's also a pacifistic resistance way of reading that. It takes
the power
nonviolent
out
resistance.
The whole power. It takes the power dynamic out of it. It takes the wind out of the sails, so to speak, and that's a real powerful thing to do. That's very interesting.
Smart guy, that guy Jesus.
Well, it's like I was listening to this. I don't know what YouTube channel it was, but they do these cool modernized. They take things like this particular one was the speech that Socrates gives at the defense of his in his defense, and they essentially kind of like translate it into what they feel like would be the most relevant modern way of saying what he was saying, and then they read it. Yeah. So you're kind of listening to like a paraphrased, modernized version. So you don't have to do the work of like if just a regular person's trying to read the words, it's hard for them to kind of really understand what he's saying or to keep up with it.
Right. Figure out what the Britannium was.
Right. So here, and I listened to it, and it was so interesting to hear it, like just in modern speak. But it was the ideas that he was trying to say, and the way he was saying, and the way he was mounting his defense and putting things into perspective. And he really kind of did the same thing where it's almost like he knew he was going to have to die, essentially.
Oh, yeah. Xenophon says that he knew. I mean, Socrates basically, and that he was basically making sure of it. I mean, if you look at the numbers of people that, the number of people that convicted Socrates versus the number of people that voted for him being executed, more people voted for him to be executed than voted for him to be found guilty. He so pissed those people off by the end of it that they were like, kill that guy.
Yeah.
Because he put his thumb in the eye of everyone. I mean, that famous line, right? What should your punishment be? He's like, well, I should be able to go to the Britannium for the rest of my life. That's a room reserved only for Olympic victors.
Right.
It's like, I deserve to be able to go to the Ritz-Carlton forever. Like, come on.
Right.
Which is great because if you ever read if you read the end of the Republic and read that line next to the Republic, it really is beautiful because it says at the very end of the Republic, if we do well by ourselves and we pursue wisdom, we ourselves will become like victors in the Olympic Games. And I love that line at the very end of the Republic where it says, if we do this, we will win just like people in the Olympics. And of course, that's a callback to Socrates saying, I should be able to go to the Britannium because I pursued wisdom my whole life. It's a great callback. In fact, there's a lot of that stuff that happens in the Republic where Plato's really putting his finger in the eye of the very people that put Socrates to death. Who else would be reading this book?
Right. I mean, it's almost like there was an issue with virtue signaling back then,
I think it's less virtue signaling. I think it's more that, look, Socrates was in a bad spot. He had been bothering people for a long time. And not just bothering people, but I think he really did have, what's the right way of putting this? He had in his mind a divine mandate. But also we have to look at Socrates as a person suffering from something like PTSD. We forget that Socrates was involved in the Peloponnesian War. In fact, he supervised, or he was a warrior, and not just that. Then the retreat at Larissa, he was on the front lines at the retreat.
He's a hero.
Retreats.
What you think was a hero? Yeah, war hero.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, retreats in the ancient world were a nightmare. I mean, you had to be able to hold the line even harder against the enemy who's trying to rout you all the while intentionally diminishing the people behind you who are your auxiliaries. So whatever he saw, he wasn't like that when he came before the war. When he came back is when he started hearing voices, and he quit bathing, and he quit paying attention to him, his hygiene, and he could drink and drink and drink and allegedly never get drunk. The Peloponnesian War dramatically changed him. And he, before the war, he was sort of just a regular guy, kind of a merchant, interested in philosophy, but not really. When he came back, he was interested in philosophy, but he had no interest in the physical philosophy of his day. He was interested in the truth and how to be a good person. That's all that mattered to him. And you have to I think what's important about Socrates is he was a man transformed by war. Stuff he'd been in the trenches at least the Battle of Larissa, and then the others as well. The other two, or the one, and he'd won laurels at both. Basically got the Medal of Honor, I guess. And I always, when I read Socrates, it's really important not to just read him as a dude that bothered people, but as a man wounded in the most profound ways I can imagine a person being wounded and still being alive, and saying, what really matters? The only thing that matters is the truth.
And it's so beautiful that you just framed that whole thing. I appreciate that. I have found I've really resonated with Socrates for that reason. In my own life and experience, I'm a combat veteran myself, and I do have PTSD that I've had to deal with, and I have a 90% disability rating from combat injuries and stuff, and so and I've struggled with that. And a lot of these philosophies and things we've talked about have helped me come to terms with those things and actually try to alchemize some of these things into gold, into betterment. But that's a exhausting process. It has been for me, and I find a sense of I find a very special. There's a special place in my heart for people like that, because I am one of the few people, statistically speaking, on Earth that can really understand that process of coming back. And then I do know through my own experience and through the experience of many of my battle buddies and friends that there's this need to find balance. So it's like if you've seen so much black, you end up longing for the equal amount of white to balance it out. And I think a lot of warriors throughout history have done that, have become artists, poets, philosophers, thinkers, trying to get down to the heart of the matter, to find some sort of balance to this crazy experience that they've had, try to just make sense of it. Like, the Book of Five Rings, Musashi, that's, one of my favorite texts. And I think it's beautiful for a lot of reasons, but I like the idea of the warrior who then goes and has this extreme experience and then tries to sort of balance it with this extreme understanding and making sense of things.
No, I think that's a very, very powerful idea. And viewing Socrates as a combat veteran, I think we all make historical figures be like us. And most philosophers are not combat veterans, at least these days. Most not. They're academics. They're people who've been born into some degree of luxury, and they basically slide their way into the university system. I also am, guarded about Socrates, because I want to preserve him as a unique figure, as someone who really saw the nightmare of combat and then really came back and was like, we got to find the truth. And not just the truth, but like, we have to be good people, because I think that, and it's so easy to say good people, but he was like, I don't want to ever have to deal with that again.
Right.
Like, no one should have to be in that situation. And he was, when he was on trial in a bunch of aristocrats, many of which had never seen the war, most of which had benefited from the war greatly. And they got whooped by the Spartans, and they had picked a fight they couldn't win, or they thought they could win easily because they were a greedy empire. And Socrates rubbed their nose in it, and they put him to death for it. Now, he also made some pretty bad political decisions, we should be honest, right? Him shacking up with Alcibiades, who was, part of the tyranny of the 30 installed by the Spartans. And also, some of his best friends. Critias was the richest dude in Athens. He was also part of the tyranny of the 30. So Socrates is also literally sleeping with the guys who had been put in charge by the Athenians. Although, again, or by the Spartans, rather. Although, to the Spartans' credit, after all of the war crimes the Athenians committed during the Peloponnesian War, which If you want to read about what happened to the Milesian delegation and the war crimes, that we praise Athens for all this, that, and the other, but we forget about the Peloponnesian War and the war crimes they committed as an empire.
Yeah.
But I think if we put ourselves into that situation, it's a very complicated business. Socrates has put himself into a very unwinnable position. And if we read Xenophon's apology, which no one reads Xenophon's apology, he basically said he was done. He said he had death wish. He was going to go in there and make a big stunt and get himself killed. And Xenophon knew Socrates. They knew each other personally. And I do think that Socrates went in there with an agenda to out the Athenians as tyrants. And he did. He paid the price for it.
Yeah, it might have been in his situation he found himself in. It might have been the only way to have some sort of sovereignty or some sort of domain in that how that was going to unfold. He could kind of see, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the only option you have, and you're thinking about Masada, right? Sometimes the option you have is how you go. You're going. The question is how. And again, like go back to, what was it? It was Epictetus, I think. If the room is smoky, stay. It might clear out. But if it gets too smoky, leave. The idea that, but you get to exit through the door. And this is a lesson Seneca knew. He knew that the gig was up. And the question was not if, but how. And so I think Socrates may have been in a similar situation.
Yeah.
It's funny, you mentioned it because I'm literally, I teach the apology every year as part of my political philosophy class.
Okay.
And I'll literally be teaching the apology 2 weeks from now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
so it's
cool.
It's a text I've worked through since I've been teaching.
That's cool. So obviously we've talked a lot about, you are an academic and you're atypical from, I think, a lot of academics, most academics in a lot of ways that we've talked about. Part of that's just you're, for whatever reason, feeling called to this, duty to share and to present information in the way you do and all of that, which I think is really cool. One of the things I've struggled with, I'm not an academic, and I always did very poorly in school. I went to private schools my whole life. I had a kind of a nice upbringing and was exposed to high quality education. I went to Jesuit high school, was taught by Jesuit priests. I grew up Catholic, but and all my friends went on to great universities and whatnot, and had these academic pursuits. But I never did well in school. I always struggled. But I was always really fascinated with information and with learning. It just didn't click with me. And so I've always had this sort of thing that I think early on in my life was a little unhealthy, and that I had kind of a chip on my shoulder, and I wanted to prove myself in front of people who had titles and were well educated. And I think that had its benefit. It helped me try to soak up as much information, try to observe myself, to pick up places I was lacking or places where I was vulnerable, and to try to mend those, to learn how to argue, to learn about humans and human nature and how to utilize that, like almost like psychological operations, and to protect myself. It was all very fear-based. And I think the last 10, 15 years of my life has been sort of tearing those things down and letting go of those things and finding peace with that, and finding union with both sides of those things, and appreciating academic work for what it is, and understanding that there's flaws, I think, in the educational system,
Sure.
But also understanding that there's some great things too that come of it, and some great people too. So trying to find peace with that, and I think that's one of the reasons that I really resonate with your channel, because I sensed that, and so I do appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and yeah, academia is one way up the mountain, just one. And I tell my students, you can call me Justin or Dr. Sledge or Professor or whatever, but if you're But if you're using those titles as a way of trying to show me respect, you should probably use those titles at the end of the class, not at the beginning, because I haven't done anything to earn your respect yet. And so you can use those titles, fine. I have those degrees, fine. But if you want to use them as just titles, whatever. I don't give a damn about medieval titles. But if you want to show me respect, well, that's the thing you'll do at the end of the class, not now.
That's really
and
cool.
anyone who demands to be respected, just because they have a bunch of medieval titles by their name, I don't have a lot of patience for that stuff. I just don't. I respect education. I respect educators. Like, K through 12 educators don't get special titles after the name most of the time. But the African American ladies that gave me the education that I have in elementary school, none of those ladies, they didn't get special titles, but they changed my life. They did more for me than so many other people with a bunch of titles and all this horse shit. Like, I just have no time for it.
Yeah.
But what I respect is, and I will say there are people out there who, I think of Walter Hanegraaff, who's the real luminary in my field. He has every accolade you can imagine, and the most humble, kind, decent, treats me, who is a very junior scholar, treated me just wonderfully with a ton of respect. And, I'm like, you're really, we have this word in Yiddish, mensch. You're really like, this is what humankind can strive for, to be both an apex academic, but also just an apex good dude. And yeah, that's rare.
Well, that's a way that you show respect towards him, by being the way that you are, right? I reached out to you just because I've said before, like, I really appreciated the content. I thought it was amazing. I thought it was really cool. I benefited from it, and I wanted to really just say thank you. And I had no expectation, and I almost didn't because I don't have 500,000 followers, like you do. I'm just starting this thing. I don't know what I'm doing. Like you were mentioning about your early videos, but I'm just doing it. I believe I'm leading with my heart. I want to connect with people, and something inside me said I wanted to reach out to you, and something else told me that's the silliest thing. This guy's got better things to do, and you're not an academic, and you've got like 30 subscribers, so why the heck would he care, and so on and so forth. But I just did it one day, and it was like this big deal for me to just felt this big release, just even sending the email, expecting never to hear from you again. And that the fact that you were so, you treated me like I did have a doctor in front of my name, and you answered my email back with, just like I was a person that deserved to be spoken to and taken seriously. And it was really cool. Just that example for me was really, really cool. And it inspired me to want to then be better and rise up to the occasion. It really lifted me up. Just the way that you were treating me with that neutrality was so refreshing, I think. So I appreciate that.
Well, I remember being also, when I was a small channel and just starting off, and all that stuff, and not just that, but aside from making sure that I don't go on podcasts with like crazy racist people or something like that, I don't look at people's subscriber rates. I just don't do that, because I feel like you can get high on your horse and really think, oh, I'm a big YouTube channel person. And I'm like, what a ridiculous, haughty, arrogant mentality. And yeah, I don't have any time for that stuff. Yeah, you gotta meet people, and you gotta meet people, and you don't meet people by self-filtering based on what you think of should be their success level or something. I think that's crazy.
Well, it's just kind of changing gears a little bit, but I wanted to talk a little about your experience in brewing beer and the alchemy of grain to alcohol.
We have
a little bit about that.
It's funny. I don't do much beer brewing these days. I think most of my brewing, actually, I do sake in the winter, deep winter here in Michigan. We get really cold winters, so it's great temperatures for brewing sake. Now I'm in the gym 4 days a week, so every time I look at a beer, I'm seeing calories and not seeing beer. So I have to be careful. Especially brew your own beer. I can imagine. I'm sure the same thing. You can get into it, and so. But these days I've been doing some distilling, actually. I've just teamed up with Detroit City Distillery to make an absinthe with them. So we just produced about 500 liters of
That's cool.
very traditional absinthe. I'd love to be able to get some of the great spirit that comes out of California, some Mark or pumice wine as a base, but that stuff's expensive in this country compared to getting
Yeah.
a pumice wine base, spirit base, like you can in France for cheap.
Hmm.
It's waste product really. But yeah, these days I'm mostly on the distilling train. Thinking about making some jenever, which one of my favorite
Cool.
beverages when I was living in Amsterdam. I love jenever.
Isn't
It's
it
like the
almost like
best.
gin, right?
Yeah, it's the grandfather of gin, right?
Okay.
When you think of Dutch courage, the English were drinking jenever, which is sort of like if folks want to imagine what jenever is, it's somewhere in between whiskey and gin. It's kind of if whiskey and gin had a baby,
Wow.
jenever would be the baby. But really love it, but it's hard to get here. Not many people drink it, so that's my next little experiment will be to get. I talked to some distillers when I was in Holland last time and talk
Uh-huh.
shop with them, which they're super excited to see some American interested in this traditional Dutch beverage.
Oh, that's cool.
But yeah, more on the distilling train this year or this part of my life, but still do sake because I love parallel brewing. Is really a fun It's a I love the idea of having to you know you, unlike grain or even grapes, fruit, where you have literally the yeast living on the organism, or you
Hmm.
at least have in grains, you have the carbohydrate, you have the alpha beta amylase actually on the grain that helps you do the conversion.
Hmm.
With rice, there's nothing on the rice to do the conversion, so you have to introduce koji to do the conversion, and then you ferment that converted carbohydrate that carbohydrate to sugar using yeast. So
Koji is like
in
an
those,
enzyme. It breaks down.
it's another microorganism.
Okay.
Yeah, so you have two microorganisms actually living in sake. One doing the conversion of the starch to sugar, and the other doing sugar to alcohol.
Sake is almost like kombucha in that way, where it's like you introduce to the sugar product, you
Yep.
introduce the SCOBY. That's so interesting. And then you have to, I know with sake, you have to polish the grain, and the degree of
Right.
polishing is the degree of sort of purity, like
Quality of
daiginju,
sake. Yeah,
junmai daiginju, that kind of stuff.
that's right. Yeah,
Right.
you want to get down to you can't grind it all the way, but yeah, the more you polish, the more you're removing that outer layer and getting down to the really really clean carbohydrate layer.
Hmm.
And but yeah, it's a fun. Sake making is a lot of fun. You have to unlearn everything you've learned about beer making because you're doing open fermentation. And luckily sake ferments pretty high, so you're getting 15, 16, 20% alcohol, so you're not going to get lacto or a lot of other infections, but you're fermenting cold, 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
So so yeah, you have to, as a brewer who's, I'm sure as a winemaker, you become obsessed with hygienic conditions, making sure everything is sanitized. And making sake, you don't do any of that.
Yeah, it's so interesting, especially in Napa. Napa's kind of it's almost like a universe in and of itself because such a, it's a very small valley, and it has such responsibility in the world, within the
Mm-hmm.
wine world.
Right.
So it's a couple miles wide by maybe 28 to 30 miles long. And you have a who's who of talent, um, from the grape growing side to the winemaking side to even the business side of things, coming to this small valley from all over the world. And it's almost like a Las Vegas type thing. It's very high risk,
Right.
and so, yeah, it's like I learned how to make wine in Napa by working harvest and learning. I don't have a college degree. I never went to university for that. And so when I went outside of Napa to work on some projects and to make wine elsewhere, even just outside of here in California still, but just outside
Mm-hmm.
of Napa, I was like freaking out because I was like, you can't make wine like this, like that, like, because it was just like the standards were just not. I was used to everything stainless steel, everything meticulously cleaned. Be careful about air exposure here and there, and using,
Yeah.
using CO2 and dry ice and argon gas and things, being very methodical. And then I went to other places, and it was like, well, you just kind of take a bucket, you throw the stuff in there, and you leave it for a few days, and you kind of smash it around with a stick. And I mean, it was like, and I realized that, yeah, there is there is an importance in the way that we do things here in Napa to sort of try to like have some basic guidelines to try to make consistently clean wines. But I also kind of realized then going to these other places that some darn beautiful wines are made and without following those instructions. So there's a middle ground somewhere.
Oh, yeah. Just go to Burgundy. I mean, you drive around Burgundy for a weekend and you'll see 50 different ways to make wine.
Sure.
And that's what I love about Burgundy. It's either, it's all these little small, it's the great thing about Burgundy versus Bordeaux. You get these, of course, in Bordeaux, you get these big mansion houses that produce these fantastic wines that are generations popular and generations worth $1 million or whatever. In Burgundy, it's just like some grandma vintages this year because she, and it's fantastic wine and so great. And
I know. And
she's making her
backyard. Is like that a lot too. The south of France. Mm-hmm. You walk into there and there's like black mold everywhere. You're like,
yeah. Oh. And you're like, what? Yeah. And, I will say again, that's why I love distilling. I can mash in on a whiskey mash, and in the middle of summer, open vat, let it sit, and I'll come back and there'll be a pellicle on it. If that were beer, you're done.
Right.
And throw it in the still.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Like all those phenols, all those, like any of that lactose stuff, the copper's going to grab it.
I remember. Yeah, exactly. I remember when we moved in 2016, there was a facility that we moved to, and I was associate winemaker for 6 different brands, and we made those at 4 different facilities in Napa. So we moved one of the more high-end brands to this brand new facility that was like state of the art. It was twice as expensive to make wine there as anywhere else in the valley, and And we had an issue where it was like too clean. Yeah. The tanks were all totally enclosed systems for doing pump overs. The wine never left the inside of the sealed tank where there was CO2 in there, so there was no exposure to oxygen. Right. And the VA levels were so low. Normally, if I'm making a Napa Cab, it's 15.5% alcohol. At the end of it, I might have on the low end 0.45 VA up to 0.7, VA, yeah. And the which is fine as long as we don't have 6 months later it's doubled. There's something really going on there. But the VAs weren't necessarily low, but we were having like 0.2 after when we were done with ML, like crazy low VAs, and the wines didn't taste as good. Yeah, and we had to tell them to like almost be a little less sterile because we need a little bit of VA in there to actually create the flavor profile we were used to.
Yeah, people talk a lot about terroir or whatever, and you see these hyper sanitized facilities, and I'm like, terroir, like air's not getting in there, it's so that yeah, and I just that, and also like you go to some of these. I was in Belgium just recently in Antwerp, and this is famous for their wild fermented beers. And you go in, there's a cool ship with spider webs above it, and they're like, "Yeah, we cleaned the spider webs once, and a beer didn't make."
Yeah,
like we need weird yeast that live in these spider webs to like fall in the beer overnight, stuff like that. There's 1,000 ways of doing this stuff, and I think that the greatest thing about the human experience is that there's 1,000 ways of doing it. There's 1,000 ways of enjoying it, and as long as you're producing a product as you're proud of, and there's people out there that are proud of it and enjoy it, and it makes their life more enriched, that they flourish. Hey man, the world's not going to get worse with there being more variety.
Right.
So I'm all about some days, like if it's a super hot day and I'm like just cut the grass, I might just want like a really crisp, really clean, really solid cab or something. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, I'm like, no, it's like a dark winter night and I want something really complex and fruity and weird.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's no problem with that at all. It's weird to me how people have to be so like, oh, I hate natural wines, or because they're always so flawed and this and that. And I'm like, there's natural wines I don't like, but I can enjoy a natural wine. I'm not too hung up on that. There's, I can enjoy a Cabernet. I can enjoy whatever, there's things I don't like. There's things I do like. Maybe there's certain times where I feel like something, and maybe there's a lot of time I do feel like just a simple wine,
Yeah, I agree.
I don't want some. I mean, I wouldn't want to drive a Formula One racing car to go get groceries. That would be annoying.
Right. Yeah, I feel the same way. I'm not trying to read sublime poetry sometimes. Sometimes I just want booze.
Yeah.
Like, and sometimes I do want that really great sublime experience. Yeah, I think that's where I love brewing. I love distilling. I can make something really sophisticated like absinthe that really requires the distiller's art, the alchemist art. And sometimes I'm like, no, sometimes I just want to like pump corn liquor through there.
Yeah.
And just make something that will get people dancing or whatever. So it's.
Are you thinking of selling some of your absinthe products, or having like an actual?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there?
They'll be on the market.
I'm not sure. Or
there will be once we just got federal approval last 2 weeks ago. We'll get through colas. The process. It just takes a while, and it's even more for spirits. So once we get approval, we'll get labels and stuff through cola, and then hopefully, probably deep winter, we'll release. But distribution's a nightmare, and so it'll totally depend on distribution. But I'm sure if you want to bottle, one can end up.
I used to be really into absinthe, and I would love to kind of get back into it. I had a whole absinthe fountain and everything, and there was a guy named T.A. Bro.
Ted's a good friend of mine.
Yeah, and so this is like 2007 or 8, 9, right in that time.
Right after legalization.
Yeah, and I found some of his stuff, and I bought it, and it was like at the time it was like $100 or something. It was a lot of money.
It still is.
Yeah,
it still is.
But I heard his whole story about how he did the analysis and put things back together, and so I used, 2008, 2009 timeframe. I had an absinthe fountain, and I had T.A. Bro's absinthe, and I was, no sugar, whatever, just the 5-to-1 ratio with a little cold water. And I was really enjoying it. And so I got to get back into that.
Yeah. Well, if you want a bottle, I'm sure one can end up on your doorstep. Me and Ted go way back. We're good friends.
That's cool. What a small world. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. Once you get into this world, you realize like everybody knows each other, and it's pretty small. But.
Well, Justin, I really appreciate you guys coming on. I feel like there was like 6, 7 different things that I probably could have had an entire other podcast on. It's really interesting stuff. Got me thinking about a lot of things. I appreciate your time.
Of course.
And I will include links to your website, to your YouTube in this, and I'll hopefully do like some timestamps and things so that people can kind of have, jump around if they need, and I'll try to do some clips as well.
Sure.
Is there any, I like to just leave the very final thing open to like, is there anything that you feel like saying, or final words, or a final message?
No, I feel like that's sort of like it would require me to become preachy or something, but I don't really have I don't have much of a preachy bone in my body. My wife's a rabbi, so I let her do all the preaching.
Oh, there you go.
But so I let her do the preaching. But no, folks want to find me, you can find me on YouTube, or I don't have any other social media because social media scares the devil out of me. But you can find me on YouTube, or check my website out if you want to get in touch with me. And
yes, it's basically Esoterica on YouTube.
Yeah,
just type Esoterica on YouTube. Right up. Lots of cool stuff. All right, beautiful. Thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it, and I'll keep up to date with you. I'll look forward to the absinthe as well, and when you get a link or a thing, I'll share that with whoever I think would be interested. And who knows, maybe we'll be able to chat again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. Just reach out.
All right, will do. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, man.
Bye.